A story about slave trade in Africa. A story about slave trade in Africa. Once upon a time, there was an African kingdom that prospered and flourished for many generations. When European explorers first arrived on the shores of this kingdom, their eyes lit up with greed and envy of the abundant resources the land promised. The king welcomed the visitors and welcomed them to trade his goods, but he had no idea what was in store for his people. As time passed, more and more Europeans began to settle in the kingdom, bringing disease and conflict. Eventually, they realized the great value of African slaves and started trading them in exchange for other goods. This became known as the slave trade. The slave trade was incredibly brutal and often included kidnapping and abduction of African villagers. Young men, women, and children were taken from their homes and shipped to Europe and the Americas as part of the slave trade. The captives were treated horribly, subjected to inhumane conditions and abuses. They were beaten, tortured, starved, and exposed to diseases in African communities and disrupted the traditional way of life. Due to the persistence and brutality of the slave trade, African kings and leaders began to form alliances and resist the Europeans. Many African nations began outlawing slavery and fighting back against their oppressors. Unfortunately, some European countries still kept trading slaves until the 19th century, when most of the world began banning the practice of human trafficking. Even though the slave trade is long gone, its lasting effects are still felt today. African communities are still recovering from the long-term economic, social, and psychological impacts of the slave trade. Even though it is impossible to undo the wrongs of the past, there is still work to be done in order to ensure that African communities continue to heal and thrive. One way to move forward is by educating future generations on slavery and its consequences. This is important in order to prevent the same mistakes from being made in the future and to build a more equitable global society. Additionally, it is important to remember and honor the courage and resilience of those who risked their lives to escape slavery or to resist. Though much work remains to be done, many strides have been made to ensure that further injustice is prevented in future generations, and that the legacy of those who suffered from the slave trade can be remembered and honored. As we move forward, it is important to continue to listen to the stories of those affected by the slave trade and to ensure that their voices are heard. When we learn and share their stories, we gain a better understanding of how slavery has impacted African societies and can work together to address the root causes of injustice. In the face of adversity, education, awareness, and solidarity are necessary tools to combat inequality and create equitable societies for all. As a result of the African slave trade, many communities were left devastated and ruined. To this day, there are still economic, social, and psychological repercussions of the slave trade that African countries must recover. In addition to educating future generations about the history of slavery and its impact, it is important to take action to ensure that justice is served. Organizations have been founded to support those affected by slave trade, to honor those people and fight for their rights. and to provide resources and support for individuals in need. By taking action, we can work together to help African communities move forward from the tragic events of the past and create a more equitable global society for everyone. One way to continue to combat the legacy of the slave trade is to advocate for fair and just labor practices in African countries. Businesses must be transparent in their operations and adhere to international labor standards. Additionally, it is important to invest in education and develop initiatives in Africa as a way of combating poverty and inequality. These initiatives can help reduce the vulnerability of communities to exploitation, help individuals gain access to employment opportunities, and ultimately reduce the appeal for further slave traders. Together, we can work to ensure that future generations will never have to experience the horrors of the slave trade, and that those affected are remembered, honored, and supported. An effective way to honor those affected by the slave trade is through art, literature, and music. Artists have used their creative outlets to depict the injustices of the slave trade and to bring attention to its lasting effects on African communities. Through these works of art, we can remember the people whose lives were lost, and the stories can serve as reminders of how far our society has come and how far we still have to go in order to create an equitable and just world for all. By supporting and promoting these works, we can continue to fight against injustice and uphold the rights of those affected by the slave trade. It is also important to recognize the invaluable contributions of those who risked their lives to resist slavery. Brave freedom fighters such as Harriet Tubman, Toussaint Louverture, and Nat Turner took risks to help secure freedom for African people. Their courage and determination serves as a reminder that together we can fight for justice and equity and create a society free from slavery and oppression. We must continue to recognize and honor the heroes of the fight against slavery and use their example to inspire future generations to stand up for what is right and work together to build a better world. Finally, it is essential that we take a stand against modern forms of slavery, such as human trafficking and forced labor, just as in the days of the Atlantic slave trade. People are still being taken from their homes against their will and subjected to exploitation for profit. We must work together to create a world where slavery does not exist and where everyone is free and safe through education, awareness, advocacy, and solidarity. We can work together to end slavery and make sure no one ever experiences its cruel and devastating consequences again. This is All About Africa YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe for more and share this video, like this video, and drop your comment in the comment section below. The video popping up now is for you to view. Let's go.